reawakening because they were political.
Yeah.
They were artistic collaborators. My mother ran a theater and cooked the breakfast and knew where we all were.
At 63 years old, Nell Newman, daughter of the legendary Paul Newman, finally broke her silence in a jaw-dropping CBS Sunday morning interview that no one saw coming. What she revealed didn't just stir emotions, it rocked Hollywood to its core. For decades, the world worshipped that image. Paul Newman's hypnotic blue eyes, his irresistible charm, and the flawless family man reputation that made him seem untouchable. But Nell's words tore through that illusion like glass shattering on marble. Behind that iconic smile wasn't the picture-perfect father or devoted husband everyone believed him to be. Instead, Nell painted a haunting portrait of a man torn between two worlds. The glamorous Hollywood legend seen by millions, and the secret life of a man who loved someone else entirely. The biggest shock came buried in his final will.
We didn't always understand each other, my father and me, but we could agree that where there was an opportunity to do something good.
A cold, calculated document that wiped away his family's name, leaving everything to one mysterious figure known only by two cryptic initials, R.R. Who was R.R.? And what secret could possibly drive one of Hollywood's most adored men to abandon his wife and children just to protect a love that stayed hidden until his dying breath? The mystery runs deep, and every layer reveals something darker than the last. In the quiet, polished streets of Westport, Connecticut, a playground for the ultra-rich, the Newman estate stood like a fairy tale mansion behind its iron gates. But inside, it wasn't all happiness and laughter. Little Nell, the golden-haired girl sketching under the old oak tree, began to see what no one else dared to imagine, that even in paradise, truth can cut deeper than betrayal. Inside that house, there were questions you didn't dare whisper, not even in the dark, because asking them could cost you the love of your own parents. Nell once believed her family was flawless, just like those perfectly framed photos hanging on the walls, all smiles and elegance. But one day, she realized something chilling. Photos don't talk, and neither did her family. In all her memories, she had never, not once, seen her parents hold hands. Not rarely, not occasionally, never. Every tender pose they struck for the cameras was nothing more than a performance. A quick, stiff embrace before the flash, like two actors forcing their final scene just to get it over with. They weren't living a love story anymore. They were trapped in a script that had long lost its meaning. Paul Newman, the man the world saw as charming and magnetic, was distant and cold behind closed doors. Those famous blue eyes that once melted hearts on screen seemed lifeless at home, and the warmth people imagined simply didn't exist. Joanne Woodward, stunning, soft-spoken, adored by millions, became silent and tense whenever he entered the room, as though the air itself turned heavy with his presence. Nell once remembered reaching for her mother's hand while she was washing dishes, whispering, "Are you sad?" Her mother pulled away instantly like she'd touched fire. She wasn't angry. She just didn't know how to reach out when feelings got too real. Every morning, Paul left the house at dawn without a word. No note, no explanation. Sometimes he'd be gone for days, sometimes weeks. And when he finally returned, all Nell ever got was a faint, empty smile before he vanished into his study and locked the door behind him, shutting the world and his family out completely. Sometimes, in that quiet, heavy house, Nell would hear the faint sound of her father's deep laughter echoing through the halls during long-distance phone calls, a laugh that didn't belong to her mother's world at all. Whoever was on the other end, it was never Joanne. Nell could never forget that freezing winter night in 1972. She heard the sharp crack of glass breaking, the sound of a wine glass shattering like a scream in the dark. She ran to her mother's room and found Joanne on the floor, her hand bleeding slightly as she clutched a jagged piece of glass, her voice trembling as she repeated over and over, "You lied again!" Terrified, Nell asked, "What did Father do?" Joanne's lips quivered before she finally whispered something that burned into Nell's memory forever. "Not every man loves women, darling, but Hollywood will never accept that." That sentence split Nell's heart in half. Days later, while rummaging through her father's things, Nell found something that confirmed the truth no one dared to say. An old Polaroid tucked deep inside his wallet. In the photo, Paul Newman smiled brighter than she had ever seen him, his arm wrapped around another man, not in the casual way friends do, but with a tenderness that said everything. His eyes weren't acting in that picture. They were full of love. When Nell, confused and scared, showed the photo to her mother, Joanne snatched it out of her hands with lightning speed. Without a word, she ripped it to shreds and threw the pieces into the fireplace, whispering through clenched teeth, "We will never speak of this. Never." From that night on, Nell learned the unbreakable rule of the Newman home.
My parents' name into the Google machine. It's a rabbit hole.
Don't ask where her father disappeared to. Don't ask why her mother needed pills just to sleep. And don't ask why they lived on separate floors like strangers under the same roof. Above all else, never ever ask about love. "We lived surrounded by walls covered in Oscars and movie posters," Nell once choked out. But not one of them spoke of happiness. The Newman home looked perfect from the outside, a Hollywood dream frozen in gold frames. Yet every smile in those portraits hid a silence that could break your heart. Whenever guests came over, names like Gore Vidal, Robert Redford, or mysterious faces flown in from New York, the entire house changed its energy. Paul would dress to perfection, his style too sharp, his charm too polished, wearing an expression that didn't belong to the man his family knew. And every time, without fail, the night ended the same way, with the echo of his bedroom door locking tight. No one dared to ask who had joined him, or why Joanne always slipped away early, her face pale and her eyes red, as if she'd been crying in secret. Those walls gleamed with trophies, but they trapped a family drowning in pretense. Nell once confessed, "Our portraits looked flawless, but our hearts were empty." Everything about their life was an illusion, one so convincing that for years she believed she was the problem for feeling that something wasn't right. As Nell grew older, the mask began to crack. One night, she caught her father standing alone in the kitchen, staring at a crumpled letter. Without hesitation, he burned it, using a silver lighter engraved with the initials GV. When Nell softly asked who he had written to, Paul looked at her with those same piercing blue eyes and said quietly, "Don't become someone I have to keep a secret from." That line haunted her for life. But the moment that carved itself deepest into her memory came one restless night. Her mother, lost in a sleepwalking daze, whispered words that froze Nell's soul. "I'm not jealous of women. I'm just scared I'll never be enough compared to him." That single confession tore through decades of silence, ripping open a truth too raw to hide any longer. And the first person bold enough to shatter that silence forever wasn't Nell. It was her brother, Scott Newman, who finally dared to pull back the veil that had covered their family's darkest secret. He was the one who asked the question no one in that house ever dared to speak. And he paid for it with his life. Scott Newman broke the silence that had strangled his family for years, and the price was unbearable. Nell's voice trembled during her 2025 CBS interview as she said, "He was the first to say out loud what we'd all been choking on for years." Scott, Paul Newman's eldest son, the one Hollywood once dubbed his rebellious double, grew up surrounded by fame and blinding spotlight. But what everyone thought was brilliance, he saw for what it truly was, a performance masking pain. Behind the cameras and the glamour, Scott realized the truth. The glow around their family wasn't glory. It was the harsh glare of a stage light shining on a tragedy ready to burst. From the day he was born, Scott carried the impossible weight of a legend's name. The world expected him to be everything Paul was, polished, confident, magnetic, perfect. But deep down, he saw the cracks in that perfection. Even in high school, questions haunted him. Why have I never seen Mom hold Dad's hand? Why does he walk past her tears like they're invisible? And why, every time I tell him I love you, Dad, does he just smirk and look away? Then came the question that tore everything apart. Why is Dad always surrounded by men who seem more than just friends? It was the one question no one could ask, the one that made the air in their home feel like glass about to break. I still remember those nights, Nell recalled, her eyes clouded with grief. Mom would be crying behind her locked door, and Scott would lose control, smashing his guitar until the neck snapped in two.
A place in my life where I can just objectively appreciate my parents, their struggles.
Meanwhile, their father sat downstairs, silent and distant, staring at the evening news with a glass in his hand, pretending not to hear the chaos echoing above him. In that moment, the cracks in the perfect Newman image weren't just showing, and they were splitting wide open. In 1974, everything came crashing down at what was supposed to be a harmless high school party. A few too many drinks, a cruel laugh, and then a boy blurted out something that would change everything. "Hey, Scott, maybe you should ask your dad if he likes men or women before you try to be like him." Those words hit Scott like a knife. He exploded in fury, his rage uncontrollable, beating the boy so badly he ended up in the hospital needing 6 stitches. Within days, the school expelled him, his future shattered in an instant. But what truly destroyed him wasn't the punishment. It was his father's silence. Paul Newman didn't show up. He didn't call. He didn't even write. Instead, he sent a lawyer with a fat envelope of money to quietly make the problem disappear. No words of comfort, no fatherly hug, nothing. When Scott came home, humiliated and heartbroken, he grabbed his old school award certificate and threw it straight into the fireplace, yelling, "You don't protect me, you don't protect Mom. Then who are you, really?" That question cut through the house like lightning. The one truth no one dared to face, spoken out loud for the first time. Yet even then, the Newman home stayed eerily quiet. No one answered. No one ever did. A year later, Nell found something hidden beneath Scott's mattress, a thin notebook that she'd treasure for the rest of her life. Its pages were covered in messy black ink, smudged by tears, as if every word had been written through pain itself. One line read, "If he doesn't really love Mom, then who am I? Am I just an accident? Was I born out of love or just to protect his image?" Those words wrapped around Nell's throat like a noose, choking her with questions she couldn't escape. But the truth they'd all been running from finally came knocking in 1977, when Confidential Weekly dropped a bombshell on Hollywood. A black and white photo from Malibu Beach, dated 1959, that would expose everything they tried to hide. The photo that hit newsstands in 1977 stopped Hollywood cold. It showed a man, same build, same walk, same unmistakable features as Paul Newman, strolling barefoot on Malibu Beach, hand in hand with another man. Both wore crisp white shirts and dress slacks. Nothing scandalous on the surface, yet the look in their eyes told a different story. It wasn't friendship captured in that frame. It was something far deeper, something tender that words couldn't hide. The industry froze in disbelief. Reporters didn't dare say it outright, but their headlines whispered everything. Who is the man in Paul's life? And the hidden side of Hollywood's most masculine star. Overnight, the whispers became a storm, and the Newman family's carefully guarded image began to crumble. At that very moment, Scott Newman was on the brink of his big break, ready to sign his first major action film contract. But just days before shooting began, the call came. He was out. No explanation, no warning, just silence. Then, at a crowded studio hallway, Scott overheard the truth that would shatter him completely. A producer muttering, "Audiences won't buy him as a hero if his father's living a double life." That night, everything inside him broke. In a fit of rage and despair, Scott smashed the bathroom mirror, shards scattering across the floor. He dragged one piece lightly across his wrist. Not deep enough to end it, but enough to send his mother screaming when she saw the blood. It wasn't just pain on his skin. It was every unspoken wound this family had buried for years, bursting open. And where was Paul? Not home, not even in the same state. He was in New York, spotted with an associate the press politely described as a close companion. After that, Scott was never the same. He shut everyone out, changed his number, and slipped into a haze of drugs. Not chasing a high, but trying to drown out the cold, distant eyes of a father who'd never truly seen him. All of America adored him, Nell recalled with a trembling voice. They worshiped the legend. while we lived in the silence behind it. She remembered calling her brother once, hoping to hear even a flicker of warmth in his voice, but all that came through the line was a long, heavy sigh, and then a click. The call ended just like that, a silence that said more than words ever could. The last time they spoke, Scott asked her one heartbreaking question. "Do you think Dad ever truly loved anyone?" Nell couldn't answer. The truth felt too heavy to touch. Just 1 month later, on November 20th, 1978, Los Angeles police forced their way into Scott's small apartment. What they found froze the world in place. Scott lay lifeless on the living room floor, surrounded by a few scattered pills, a half-finished bottle of red wine, and the glow of the television still flickering across his face. And on that TV, Paul Newman, smiling as he walked across a stage to accept an award for Slapshot. The timing was haunting, the world cheering while his son's light quietly went out. The police report was brief, almost mechanical. No signs of violence, cause of death, suspected suicide due to drug overdose. But Nell, only 18 at the time, knew the truth in her bones. Scott didn't die from drugs or alcohol. He died from silence. He died because no one ever dared to answer the question that haunted him his whole life. Did our father ever live in truth? That question echoed in Nell's mind for years, each word cutting deeper as she began to see the full picture, that their family, their home, and even her father's shining legacy were built layer by layer on secrets too dangerous to name. Then, on a bitter winter night in 1981, as snow and wind swept across the backyard of the Newman estate in Westport, Nell stood by the window, watching it all disappear beneath a white blanket, realizing that even the truth, like footprints in the snow, could be buried if no one dared to remember. In the bone-chilling quiet of that winter night, 22-year-old Nell Newman wrapped her sweater tighter and stepped softly down the long hallway, just meaning to grab another blanket from the kitchen. But halfway there, she stopped cold. From behind the half-closed door of her father's study, a warm yellow light spilled through the crack, flickering gently across the dark floorboards. What froze her in place wasn't the light. It was the sound. A sigh. Not the kind of breath an actor gives while rehearsing lines, and not the tired exhale of someone finishing a long call. No, this was different. Heavy, burdened, full of years of something unspoken. It was the kind of sigh that carries a secret trying to claw its way out. Heart pounding, Nell crept closer. Through the narrow gap, she saw her father sitting at his desk, head bowed, a fountain pen gliding furiously across a thick stack of paper. It wasn't a movie script. It wasn't some business report. It was a letter, handwritten, personal, 3 full pages long. And the handwriting, she recognized it instantly. It was the same looping script he used only once a year on Christmas cards to her mother. But this time, the name at the top wasn't Joanne. Nell leaned in just enough to make out the first line. "Dear Red, the one who reminds me that I am still human, not merely a symbol." Her breath caught. The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. That one sentence, those trembling ink strokes, told her everything she had never been allowed to ask. In that letter, Paul didn't mention movies, awards, or fame. There were no grand speeches, no polished lines. Just the raw voice of a man stripped of the roles he'd spent his life playing. A man finally daring to write his truth to the one person who made him feel real. He didn't write about the awards, the applause, or the glory he'd once earned. Instead, Paul poured his soul into memories far more intimate, ones the world had never known. He wrote about the way Robert Redford's eyes caught the desert light as they stood side by side filming the final scene of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. He described how in those quiet in-between moments, Redford's hand would graze his shoulder when no one was watching, a touch so subtle, yet it carried everything words could never say. Paul confessed that during those late nights on hotel rooftops, the two of them would sit with a bottle of whiskey between them, not speaking, afraid that if they ever did, the truth would come spilling out, unstoppable. One line in that letter burned itself into Nell's mind forever. "There was one night you looked at me, only looked, and I felt as if the whole world had forgiven me. Red, you didn't need to say a word." But if you ever walked into this room again and looked at me the way you once did, I would give up everything. The fame, the family, all of Hollywood. Nell's hands trembled violently as she read those words, her pulse pounding so hard she could barely breathe. It was as if the walls of her entire childhood were collapsing around her. Then suddenly, the phone rang in the next room. The sharp sound jolted her back to reality. Paul stood up, leaving the desk, his footsteps fading down the hall. In a rush of panic, Nell carefully slid the letter back into place, her heart racing as if she'd just trespassed into a vault of secrets the world was never meant to see. But one truth was now carved into her memory. Her father hadn't been writing to a friend. He'd been writing to the one who truly held his heart. A few weeks later, that truth seemed to rise from the shadows. Joanne Woodward, in California at the time, posing for a Vogue cover shoot, abruptly canceled everything and jumped on the earliest flight back to Westport. The reason? An anonymous phone call with no name, no number, just one chilling sentence that would change everything. The message was short, cold, and devastating. If you still care about your marriage, go to the Mayflower Hotel, room 708. That was it. No name, no explanation. Just that single sentence that would unravel everything. That same night, Paul Newman told Joanne he was heading to New York for a business meeting, supposedly to discuss a new script. But that partner wasn't a producer. It was Robert Redford, the man the press had long hinted might be his true soulmate. No one ever learned exactly what happened inside room 708. The door to that truth stayed locked forever. But when Joanne returned to Westport the next morning, her silence said it all. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen despite layers of makeup, and there was a dark bruise on her arm, the kind that comes from being held too tightly. She didn't speak a single word. She didn't have to. That night, for the first time in decades, the Newman mansion, normally still and soundless, came alive with chaos. No yelling, no words exchanged, just the violent crash of glass and porcelain shattering behind their bedroom door. One of Joanne's prized Italian lamps lay in pieces across the floor, its shards glinting like ice under the light. From that night forward, something inside Paul Newman changed completely. He picked up smoking again, the very habit Joanne had made him quit back in the 60s. Sleep seemed to abandon him. Most nights, Nell would find him sitting alone on the porch long past midnight, staring into the darkness as if searching for something that could never be found. Sometimes she'd see him frozen in front of the mirror, gripping a fountain pen so tightly his knuckles turned white, as if the pen itself carried the weight of everything he couldn't say. And one evening, when Nell accidentally dropped a Beatles record in the dining room, the sound of the crack sent him spiraling. Without a word, Paul grabbed the Baccarat crystal vase, the same one gifted to him and Joanne on their wedding day, and smashed it against the table. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. He didn't curse. He didn't explain. He just walked out, leaving behind a room full of broken glass and memories that no one dared to touch. The silence Paul left behind that night felt heavier than any scream, heavier than any slap. It was the kind of silence that filled every corner of the house like smoke. Joanne drifted through the mansion like a ghost, her once bright presence fading into something hollow and cold. From that moment on, she never again called him honey or my love. Those words were gone forever. When a reporter once dared to ask her about Robert Redford, she answered with just two sharp words: that man. No emotion, no warmth, no name, no title, just emptiness. It was the response of someone too tired to pretend anymore. At the time, Nell was still studying ecology, far from the chaos, but slowly she began to understand the truth that had been hiding in plain sight all along. Her parents' marriage wasn't built on love. It was a 50-year performance, a stage play where two world-class actors refused to step out of character just to keep the illusion alive. But one anonymous phone call, one mysterious letter, and one hotel room had ripped that script apart. After that, Nell began paying closer attention. In an old drawer inside her father's study, she stumbled upon pages of phone numbers labeled only with single letters, R, T, and sometimes just a question mark. Some were crossed out, others had scribbled notes beside them. Call after 10 p.m. or don't let Joanne know. She found old, faded photographs, too, folded tightly into quarters and hidden behind family portraits. The faces in them were strangers, but their eyes told the truth. They looked at her father the same way he once looked at Redford, with love that dared not speak its name. And just when Nell thought she finally understood everything, that she had uncovered every buried secret, she realized something even more shocking. Robert Redford might have been the most important man in her father's heart, but he wasn't the only one. Because in 1981, inside the elegant marble lobby of the Carlyle Hotel, the private playground of New York's elite, whispers began to stir through the velvet-carpeted hallways. A new secret was slipping quietly between the chandeliers and champagne glasses, one that no one, not even Nell, could have imagined. That night at the Carlyle Hotel was supposed to be ordinary, a simple errand, nothing more. Nell had just come from a promising internship interview at a local TV station, her mind buzzing with excitement and plans for the future. She stopped by the hotel only to drop off a stack of documents for her mother. But when the elevator doors slid open, her world froze like a movie scene that should have never been filmed. Down the hallway, framed by the golden glow of the chandelier, stood her father, Paul Newman. But he wasn't alone, and he wasn't with Joanne. Walking beside him was Gore Vidal, the legendary writer, screenwriter, and razor-sharp political voice, a man who had been a family friend for more than 20 years. But that night, he didn't walk with the distance of friendship. No, the space between them was charged with something unmistakable. Nell watched as Gore's hand brushed against her father's wrist, just for a second, but long enough to say what words never could. Paul turned slightly, a faint, knowing smile touching his lips. Both men wore dark overcoats, walking shoulder to shoulder so close that a single gust of air could have brought their faces together. It wasn't scandalous. It was intimate, painfully quiet, and impossible to misunderstand. And then Paul looked up and saw her. Nell would later tell Esquire in 2018, her voice barely steady, "That look will stay with me forever. It wasn't the look of a man caught doing something wrong. It was the look of someone silently pleading, 'Don't say it. Please don't.'" For a long second, no one moved. The hallway seemed to stop breathing. Gore's eyes flicked toward her, and instead of panic or guilt, he offered her a calm, polite smile. Like nothing at all had happened, like the world wasn't cracking open in front of them. In that single frozen moment, Nell's childhood illusions of love, of family, of truth collapsed quietly between the glittering lights of the Carlyle, never to be rebuilt again. Paul stepped into the elevator without a word, the metallic doors sliding shut in slow motion, and just like that, the secret was sealed between them forever. Nell stood frozen, her reflection trembling in the mirrored walls, realizing she now carried something she could never speak of. From that night on, Gore Vidal didn't fade away. He became a constant presence. His name slipped into their lives quietly but unmistakably. A phone call here, a visit there. Joanne said nothing, but Nell saw everything. There were late-night calls at 2 in the morning, business trips that stretched on for days, and small handwritten notes left beside the house phone that simply read, "G called, call back." One afternoon, Nell watched her father pull something from his shirt pocket, an old black and white photograph. In it, Paul and Gore sat by a lakeside, leaning back against each other, both gazing off into the distance. It wasn't a snapshot of friends. It was a moment caught between two people who had long since crossed a line and never found their way back. Unable to hold it in anymore, Nell finally asked her mother outright, "Do you think Dad isn't the man you always thought he was?" Joanne Woodward, the Oscar-winning actress who had once played a woman with multiple personalities, went completely still. Then, after a long silence, she said softly, "There are some things no one ever teaches us how to put into words, but they still exist every single day, even when we pretend to forget." For Nell, that answer was all she needed. Silence had become her family's second language, and this time it spoke louder than truth itself. As for Gore Vidal, he never openly admitted anything, not once. But years later, in 1995, his memoir Palimpsest contained one haunting line that made the world stop and wonder who he was really writing about. There are men who will never belong to us, but every time they smile, we feel alive. Those words hit like thunder, and for Nell, there was no doubt left about who those men were. Gore Vidal never once said Paul Newman's name, not in public, not even in print, but everyone knew who he meant. Reporters didn't need confirmation. The truth was written between the lines. Gore had never written words like those for anyone else, not for the men he'd openly loved, not for the companions he'd once spoken about with pride. Only one man ever stayed unnamed, and that was Paul, the one who never confessed a single thing. Years later, during a 2006 Vanity Fair interview, the question finally came. The journalist asked bluntly, "Was Paul Newman the greatest love of your life?" Gore paused, lifted his glass, and took a slow sip before looking straight into the camera. Then, with a faint smile, he said softly, "We shared nights that neither of us ever wanted to leave. That is all I can say." The entire studio went dead silent. No one dared ask another question. They didn't need to. The truth had already been spoken between those few words. But Nell didn't need any interview to tell her what she already knew. The truth had been carved into her family long ago, and it never left. By 2003, Joanne Woodward had begun to fade. The first signs of memory loss crept in. Forgetting birthdays, misplacing names, sometimes staring blankly at familiar faces she could no longer place. Yet even as her mind drifted between dream and memory, one thing refused to fade. One night, while half asleep, she suddenly reached out and gripped Nell's hand with surprising strength. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "Do you know the way your father looked at Gore? That was a gaze he never once gave to me. And even if I forget everything, even if I lose myself, I'll never be able to forget that look." Those words broke something inside Nell. Her mother, the great Joanne Woodward, had spent her life holding the image of perfect love, only to admit in the end that she had never truly been seen the way her husband saw another. For decades, Joanne had been the symbol of Hollywood grace, an actress praised for her intelligence, loyalty, and quiet power in a world built on illusions. She had won the Academy Award for The Three Faces of Eve and graced the cover of Life magazine as the one woman Paul Newman claimed he would never leave. But behind that promise lay a love story the world never saw, one built on silence, sacrifice, and the kind of truth too dangerous to ever speak aloud. For decades, Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward were hailed as America's golden couple, radiant, romantic, flawless, the perfect love story written in lights. But by the end, all that brilliance, all that glamour had faded into a distant memory. Joanne now sat alone in a quiet nursing home room in Westport, Connecticut, the same town where their once bustling mansion stood. The weak sunlight trickled through the dusty window pane, falling across her frail, trembling hands, the same hands that had once held Paul Newman's heart for more than 50 years. Alzheimer's had crept in like a silent thief, stealing her mind piece by piece. It took everything, from the dates that once mattered most, like Nell's birthday, to the moments that had once made her feel immortal. Her first big role, the glittering awards, the electric nights under Broadway's lights, all of it was fading away, slipping quietly into the fog of forgetting. One afternoon, Nell brought her mother a photograph, a beautiful shot of Joanne and Paul at the Golden Globes in 1974. Joanne studied it for a long moment, her eyes searching, before she whispered softly, "Who is this person? Do I know them?" The question broke Nell's heart. Her mother no longer recognized the love story the world had worshipped. But even as her memory unraveled, one name refused to fade. It rose again and again, unshakable and haunting. Not Paul, not Nell, not any of her children. The name was Robert. At first, Nell brushed it off as a random confusion, a trick of a fading mind. But soon, the nurses began glancing at her with uneasy eyes. They whispered about the nights when Joanne would suddenly awaken, her eyes vacant, yet her voice startlingly clear, as if some buried truth was clawing its way out. In the dead of night, she would murmur confessions no one had ever heard before about a strange perfume clinging to Paul's clothes, unanswered phone calls from the Essex House Hotel in New York, and a single golden hair left behind on a white pillow. And every time she spoke, her tone carried a pain that time had never healed. The pain of a woman who had always known her husband's heart didn't fully belong to her, but could never bring herself to say it out loud. And then, at last, Joanne spoke a name. Slow, trembling, each syllable soaked in sorrow. Robert Redford. The sound of it sent a chill through Nell's spine. It was a name she hadn't heard in decades. Not since that single day when she was 17, the day she'd stumbled into a memory she'd tried her whole life to forget. Back then, she had skipped school on a whim and taken a train to New York full of teenage curiosity. She ended up at the Essex House Hotel, the same place her mother now mentioned in her broken, fading voice. As the elevator doors slid open, Nell had frozen behind a marble pillar, her heart pounding as she saw her father step out. Paul Newman, immaculate in a gray suit, every inch the Hollywood legend. But walking beside him was Robert Redford. She remembered the easy way her father's hand rested on Robert's shoulder.
When people say, what was it like? What was your father like? I always say, well, what was your father?
The quiet laughter they shared as they crossed the lobby, carefree and close, like two people who had long ago stopped pretending. It wasn't scandalous. It was natural, real, unguarded, a closeness that didn't need to hide behind words. Nell had locked that moment deep inside herself, buried it so far down she almost believed it never happened. She never told her mother, never breathed a word to anyone. She told herself she must have misunderstood, that she was young, dramatic, imagining things. And she did it all to protect the fragile illusion her family was built on. But now, hearing her mother's voice years later, weak, fading, yet describing the same hotel, the same mysterious scent, the same unspoken sorrow, the walls inside Nell crumbled. The truth she'd buried came roaring back, unstoppable. Joanne's voice broke through the silence, soft but devastating. "That was the day he betrayed me," she whispered, her gaze fixed on an old photograph, one taken on a sunlit beach in Rhode Island, back when the Newman family still smiled together under a warm summer sky. In 1985, he told me he was meeting a director about a new script, but I knew, I always knew, because that look never meant for me. Those words shattered whatever fragments of innocence Nell had left. It wasn't jealousy, and it wasn't anger. It was truth. A truth that had lived quietly for decades, hidden fame, marriage, and the image of perfection, till now, when the name Robert Redford finally brought everything into focus. Joanne lowered her head, her voice so thin it trembled like a candle's last flicker. Still, she forced the words out, broken, haunting, unforgettable. Essex House, room 1217. I called the whole night, but no one ever picked up. To anyone else, those might have sounded like meaningless fragments from a fading mind. But to Nell, they struck like thunder. That room number, that hotel, aligned perfectly with the memory she had buried deep inside her for decades. It was the same place, the same night she had seen her father with Robert. The puzzle pieces she had spent her life ignoring suddenly locked together in cruel clarity. Nell sat frozen, her chest heavy as if a stone had been placed on it, pressing harder with every breath. Her mother, the woman who had forgiven every one of Paul Newman's sins, who had protected his image and defended their family's name for over half a century, still remembered that hotel room number with painful precision. Even when her mind had been stripped bare by illness, her heart refused to let go of that wound. Joanne never screamed about betrayal. She never shouted. She didn't need to. The way her eyes drifted toward the sunset each evening, filled with a quiet, endless ache, said more than words ever could. Those eyes, dim but unbroken, were her silent accusation, her final truth carved into every glance. One afternoon, Nell finally gathered the courage to ask, "Mom, do you still remember how Dad loved you?" Joanne turned her head slowly. Her cloudy eyes met Nell's with a fragile steadiness, and she whispered, her voice faint as mist, "I once believed it. But after that day, I no longer did." That simple sentence shattered the myth the world had adored for generations. The couple had once embodied the perfect Hollywood love story, the golden standard of devotion and romance, now stood revealed as something heartbreakingly fragile. Their story, once radiant and untouchable, had burst like soap bubbles under the harsh glare of truth. And just as the family began to brace themselves for Joanne's slow, sorrowful goodbye, thinking the worst had already passed, fate had one final, unexpected twist waiting in the wings. Everyone believed Paul Newman would stay by Joanne's side until her final breath. The devoted husband, the symbol of American grace, the man the world saw as pure goodness. But when the truth finally came to light, it struck like lightning. Behind that familiar face, the soft smile, the kind eyes, the charm that had melted hearts for generations, there hid a decision so cold, so deliberate, that it shattered his family to their core. It wasn't a tragic mistake. It wasn't some legal mix-up. It was planned, intentional, every detail arranged long before his passing. When Nell finally sat down to read through the lines of her father's will, her breath caught in her throat. The deeper she read, the worse it became. The empire built under Newman's own, worth over $100 million, wasn't divided as he had always promised. There was nothing for Joanne, the wife who had stood by him for 50 years, even as her memories slowly crumbled away. Nothing for the children who had lived through the sacrifices, who had watched him rise and helped build the very image of the perfect family that had defined his legacy. Every cent, every share, every trace of fortune went to one man, Robert Forrester. That name had lingered for years like a quiet shadow in the background. A business associate, a close friend, someone mentioned but never explained. But now it was written in ink across the final pages of Paul Newman's life. Then came the final blow, the lawyer's voice echoing through the silent room as he read the clause aloud. Anyone who contests this will forfeit even the small cash allocation provided. The words felt like ice water poured straight into Nell's chest. She turned to her sister Clea, her voice trembling as she whispered, "We didn't just lose our father. We lost the chance to ever really know who he was." That sentence hung heavy in the air, a truth too raw to ignore. The world saw Paul Newman as a saint, the generous philanthropist, the family man, the Hollywood hero with a heart of gold. But to his own family, those final papers revealed something far darker. A man who had spent a lifetime carefully crafting an image while hiding a love, a loyalty, and a secret that rewrote everything they thought they knew about him. The truth that the world had never been meant to see came out through a leak, a confidential addendum to Paul Newman's will, exposed by a former assistant at the law firm that had handled his estate. Buried deep in the paperwork was a shocking revelation that no one could have imagined. Paul had once planned to create a private trust called the Quiet Legacy. But the most jaw-dropping detail wasn't the name. It was the beneficiary. The first person listed wasn't Joanne. It wasn't Nell. It wasn't any of his children. It was someone identified only by two initials, RR. The moment that leaked, the media went wild. Vanity Fair and the New York Post both dropped explosive front-page stories suggesting what everyone was already whispering, that RR stood for Robert Redford. Overnight, old rumors that had once been brushed off as gossip came roaring back, more haunting and believable than ever before. Suddenly, the world began to question everything. Those years of friendship, those private trips, the way the two Hollywood icons had looked at each other in interviews. Reporters dug up archives, rewatching clips, reading between every line. And then came the darkest twist. A journalist from The Advocate claimed that Paul and Robert had taken a secret trip to Tuscany in 1982. No wives, no children, no assistants, just the two of them, hidden away inside a gated villa surrounded by high stone walls. The story claimed the villa's staff had been dismissed for that week, leaving only the legends behind closed doors. When Nell heard this, her world spun. She had never once heard of that trip, not from her father, not from her mother, not from anyone. Desperate for answers, she called Dorothy Hughes, her mother's longtime friend and personal assistant during the 1980s. Dorothy's voice was heavy when she finally replied, "Joanne knew, but she chose silence. She thought that if Paul had his freedom, maybe he would come back to her. Not whole, but still hers. Those words hit Nell like a storm. Her mother had known and endured it quietly for years. In the end, Paul Newman didn't just leave behind a legacy of films, fame, and philanthropy. He left behind a fortress, a wall of wealth and legal language, all handed to another man to protect. A fortress so sharp and cold it sliced through the final thread connecting him to the family that had once believed they were his greatest love. There were no handwritten letters left behind, no personal notes, not even a single line of explanation, only the cold final signatures stamped across the pages of Paul Newman's will. And when reporters demanded an answer, only one man spoke. At a 2009 press conference, Robert Forrester faced the crowd and said calmly, "He trusted me, and I believe that's the only thing that truly matters." Those words hit like a gavel striking steel. Final, cold, unchallengeable. It was as if a door had slammed shut forever, locking away every answer Nell would never get, her mind filled with questions that would never find a voice. How could the man who once swore he would live for his family and die for his family leave them like strangers at his own grave? On September 26, 2008, the world lost Paul Newman, the man whose piercing blue eyes had become Hollywood legend, the screen icon who had captured hearts for over half a century. He took his final breath at his quiet farmhouse in Westport, Connecticut, surrounded by the town that had once believed in his perfect life. The nation mourned. CBS filled its broadcast with clips from The Hustler and Cool Hand Luke. CNN ran tribute specials filled with heartfelt words from friends, co-stars, and fans who had never even met him. To America, Paul Newman was the ultimate gentleman, the devoted husband, the loving father, the selfless humanitarian. But that was only half the truth. Behind the cameras, behind the glossy magazine covers, was a family fractured by secrets they never saw coming. And just 3 days after the country said its last goodbye, reality arrived like a ghost at the door. Nell Newman, the eldest daughter, received a formal call from her father's private law office. The voice on the other end was detached, professional, emotionless. "We have officially activated the will according to Mr. Newman's instructions. Please check your internal mailbox. The division of assets has been completed." That was it. No condolences, no compassion, just a transaction. In that moment, Nell realized the harsh truth. Her father's final act wasn't one of love or legacy. It was distance, the same distance that had always lived between him and the people who once called him Dad. Only a few minor points remained to be clarified. That's all the message said. But the moment Nell read those words, her stomach twisted. Something felt wrong, deeply wrong. And she was right. The final version of Paul Newman's will, signed just 6 weeks before his death, wasn't the same one the family had seen before. This version had been rewritten, stripped bare, and sealed in cold legal language that erased the names of his wife and all 6 of his children. Gone, every mention of them. His entire fortune, more than $600 million, including his shares in Newman's Own, his real estate, image rights, and lifelong royalties, had been transferred to a single entity, the Newman's Own Foundation. And who sat at the top of that empire? Robert Forrester, the very man Paul had trusted completely in his final years, the man now holding every thread of his legacy in his hands. The Newman family was outraged, blindsided, and heartbroken. But what made it even more chilling was the silence that followed. Not one major outlet questioned it. No investigative journalist pushed further. The same media that had once worshipped Paul Newman suddenly went quiet. No one asked why his wife of 50 years, Joanne Woodward, by then struggling with dementia, was completely written out. Nell, who had once run the environmental branch of the foundation her father had proudly built, was dismissed just months later. No reason, no warning, no explanation. It was as though she had become a stranger to the very institution her family's name created. In 2015, during a rare interview with the New York Times, Nell's composure finally cracked. Tears streamed down her face as she said, "I never asked for a dime, but I couldn't bear to see them turn my father into a brand and cast my mother aside as if she was never part of his life." Her words echoed like a cry that had been suppressed for years. And as whispers spread, an unofficial investigation quietly began, led by independent lawyers, investigative journalists, and even some of Paul's former colleagues. Each of them, after digging into the records and timelines, came to the same chilling conclusion, one that would shake the very image of Paul Newman the world thought it knew. The conclusion that slowly emerged was devastating. Paul Newman may not have been of sound mind when he signed his final will. Leaked medical records from a private clinic in New York suggested that as early as mid-2007, Paul had begun showing troubling signs of decline. Forgetfulness, confusion, sudden mood swings, and lapses in judgment. By May 2008, just 3 months before the signing of his final will, doctors reportedly diagnosed him with temporary incapacity for legal decision-making. But those records mysteriously vanished from the official case files. They were never acknowledged in court, never mentioned in public. Then, an anonymous source who had once worked closely with Paul's legal team came forward to Vanity Fair. Their revelation sent shockwaves through Hollywood. "I saw a handwritten letter Paul wrote to Joanne in June," the insider claimed. "It completely contradicted the will. He apologized to her, said he feared he wouldn't have time to fix the mistake, and begged her forgiveness if anything went wrong after he was gone." But that letter, the one document that could have changed everything, was never included in the official legal record. The source, terrified of retaliation, refused to reveal their identity, saying only that they still feared for their life. By 2019, the Wall Street Journal had picked up the story, launching an explosive investigative series asking the question everyone wanted answered. Who was really behind Paul Newman's final will? The Guardian went even further, boldly labeling it the greatest theft of legacy Hollywood has ever witnessed. And as for Robert Forrester, the man who now sat atop the Newman's own foundation, the picture only grew darker. Once he assumed full control, reports surfaced that he had quietly doubled his own salary while cutting funds for the very causes Paul had promised to support. Charities linked to the Newman family saw their budgets slashed overnight. Long-standing environmental and children's programs were suddenly restructured or discontinued altogether. The empire Paul had built to give back was slowly transforming into something colder, more corporate, more secretive, and more self-serving. What had once been a legacy of love, generosity, and purpose was now tainted by power, silence, and unanswered questions. And Nell was left to wonder if her father's final act had ever truly been his own. The foundation that Paul Newman had once poured his heart into, supporting charities, children's hospitals, and environmental projects for over 2 decades, had now become something unrecognizable. Under Robert Forrester's control, every Newman family member was barred from serving on the foundation's board. It was as if the family name had been erased from its own legacy. By 2020, Nell had reached her breaking point. Determined to uncover the truth, she filed a petition with the Connecticut State Court demanding her father's will be reopened and re-examined. But the court's answer was cold and final. There is insufficient evidence to prove Paul Newman was not of sound mind when he signed the will. The doors of justice slammed shut once again. Yet fate wasn't done with the story. In late 2021, an unexpected discovery changed everything. One of Joanne Woodward's former assistants, while sorting through old books in the couple's private library in Westport, stumbled upon a worn copy of The Prophet by Khalil Gibran, a book that had always held deep meaning for both Joanne and Paul. Tucked between its pages was something extraordinary, a handwritten letter, its ink slightly faded but unmistakably real. The handwriting matched Paul's. His fingerprints were still faintly visible on the edges. The letter was short, but it was enough to break hearts and rewrite everything. My dearest Joanne, if I am no longer lucid enough to say this to you directly, then read it here. Everything belongs to you, from the name to the career to the reason I still exist after all these years. If anything goes astray, believe that I did not choose it. I love you until the very end. Paul. It wasn't a legal document, but it was something far greater, the last truth of a man trapped between love, legacy, and the fear of losing control. When this discovery surfaced, it sent ripples through the press, reopening old wounds and questions everyone thought were buried.
Almost as wonderful as when my father looked at me and said to my husband and I, "You've broken the cycle of bad parenting."
And in 2023, when an ABC reporter asked Nell if she still wanted to reopen the case surrounding her father's will, she smiled faintly, a mix of sadness and peace, and said, "There are things that can't be reclaimed with paperwork, but I believe my father left the truth somewhere." That letter, hidden for over a decade, had done what the courts, the lawyers, and the tabloids never could. It gave Nell one final glimpse of the man her father truly was. And maybe, just maybe, Paul Newman is still waiting for the world to find the truth he left behind. Because what he spent a lifetime burying wasn't his fortune, his famous dressing recipe, or the Hollywood glory that made audiences worship him. What he guarded most fiercely, hidden behind that calm, gentle smile and those ocean-deep blue eyes, was far simpler and far more human. He was protecting himself. The real Paul Newman, the man who lived under blinding lights but carried shadows inside him that he never dared to name. He was a legend to the world, but a mystery to his own heart. And when the final curtain fell, when the whispers grew into accusations and legal battles tore open his legacy, there was only one thing left that truly mattered in Nell's heart. Not rage, not bitterness, not even the fight for what was lost. It was love, quiet, loyal, and unbreakable love. No matter how many signatures rewrote their history, no document could erase the bond between a daughter and her father. It was invisible, but real, bleeding a little more with every passing year. Nell Newman had once been called her father's spiritual heir, the daughter who would carry his light forward. Her face appeared on the brand's eco-friendly products. Her work embodied the purpose Paul had claimed to stand for. She truly believed she was continuing her father's legacy with pride and faith. But then everything was taken from her. The name, the mission, the right to belong to the world he'd built. It was as if her place in his story had been scrubbed clean. Still, one thing could never be erased: blood. The tie that no contract or foundation could sever. In her final interview with CBS Sunday Morning in 2010, Nell's voice broke as she spoke through tears that refused to stop. "I never stopped loving my father," she said. "No matter what he did, no matter how I was shut out of every decision, I still loved him the way a daughter loves her father." Her words hung in the air, soft, trembling, eternal. The sound of a love story far more powerful than any scandal, will, or secret that came before it. And yet, love doesn't always walk side by side with forgiveness, and truth, not when left unspoken, turns into an abyss that swallows every memory whole. "I believe he loved us," Nell said quietly. "I want to believe that's true. But I just wish he'd been brave enough to live honestly, not with the world, but with his own family." Her voice carried no anger now, only exhaustion. The fury was gone, replaced by a sorrow so heavy it seemed to hang in the air, the pain of a daughter staring at a door that would never open again. She never explained what living honestly truly meant. She didn't have to. Everyone watching understood. In the locked drawers, the hidden letters, the quiet meetings that never made the headlines, and the whispers shared between men who had once been called his friends, the truth was scattered like broken glass. There was Scott. There was Redford. There was Dean. Each name, each rumor, each shadow, another piece of a puzzle that would never be finished. These were the secrets Paul Newman carried to his grave, and the ones his family was left to live with forever. They weren't punished by money or by loss, but by silence, that heavy silence that follows when love and truth refuse to exist in the same room. It wasn't just a will that divided them. It was the breaking of memory itself. Because when a man becomes a legend, his children are often left standing behind him, unseen, unheard, and full of questions that will never find answers. And so when the story finally closes, when the screen fades to black and the spotlight dies, there's only one question left echoing in the hearts of everyone who listens. Are we truly living as ourselves before it's too late? Sometimes, late at night, Nell still sits alone on the porch of the old house in Westport, the same porch where her father once spent sleepless hours staring into the dark. She watches the moonlight stretch across the garden, silver and still, and in that quiet glow, she feels the weight of everything that was said and everything that never was. Her father once tended this very garden, the same patch of earth now covered in moonlight. The wind moves softly through the tall maple trees, carrying whispers that sound almost like words never spoken. In that silence, Nell finally understands. The real pain isn't the fortune lost, or the cold signatures on a will, or even the rumors that never seem to fade. The deepest wound is the emptiness, the hollow space between a father and his daughter. An emptiness not caused by distance or death, but by silence. The kind of silence built brick by brick from a lifetime of secrets. She realizes that the love between a father and daughter never truly dies. It stays alive, even in anger, even in betrayal, even in the sleepless nights filled with questions that will never have answers. But when truth is buried, love transforms into something else, a quiet obsession, a longing that refuses to fade. It's like a river forced to flow backward, crashing against its own current, searching desperately for a way out. And deep inside, Nell still wishes for one impossible thing, that her father just once had found the courage to sit down, look his children in the eyes, and tell them everything. No hiding, no pretending. Just the truth, raw and real, no matter how painful it might have been. Because even a cruel truth would have been better than a lifetime of silence. Now, with nothing left but fragments of memory and unanswered questions, Nell has learned to accept what the world still refuses to see, that Paul Newman will always remain a paradox. To millions, he was a shining legend, a symbol of charm, generosity, and grace. But to those who loved him most, he was an unsolved mystery, a man whose brilliance was matched only by the shadows he left behind. And maybe that emptiness is his real legacy. Not one built from fame, money, or movies, but from the haunting questions that refuse to die. Questions that force us to look inward and ask ourselves, do we truly live honestly with who we are, or do we choose silence until it's too late? Behind Hollywood's golden glow lies a trail of forgotten letters, children left in the corners of fame, and a truth that may have been buried forever with Paul Newman himself. But the mystery lingers, whispering through time, through his films, through the lives he touched, daring us to wonder what secrets even legends carry to their graves. So now, we turn that question to you. Have you ever thought about what it means when a man the world praises for integrity hides a truth so profound that even his own family never knew? Share your thoughts down below. We'd love to hear your perspective. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss what's coming next.